Hello everyone and welcome back to RPG PhD, where we break down the theory behind the fun. I'm Dr. Ben and today we're diving into a fascinating intersection between cultural psychology and tabletop gaming. Specifically, we're exploring Hofstede's Uncertainty Avoidance Index, a framework used to understand how different cultures and individuals respond to ambiguity and how it shows up at the gaming table. From rule-heavy campaigns to improvisational chaos, the way we play often reflects deeper cultural values. So grab your favorite set of dice and let's explore how this plays out across different RPG systems and play styles. Tabletop role-playing games are a global hobby, bringing together players from diverse cultural backgrounds around a shared table of imagination. In these games, from classic Dungeons & Dragons to horror mystery Call of Cthulhu or the improvisational Blades in the Dark, players and game masters make countless decisions in worlds of uncertainty. Cultural values can subtly shape how groups approach the uncertainty inherent in role-playing. In cross-cultural psychology, uncertainty avoidance refers to how comfortable a society is with ambiguity and unpredictability. We will look at uncertainty avoidance as a cultural dimension and then examine how high versus low uncertainty avoidance cultures or individuals might differ in gameplay style, decision-making, rule enforcement, and narrative preferences in tabletop RPGs. Drawing on examples from popular systems and gaming theory, the analysis highlights how cultural values shape both player behavior and GM facilitation. Uncertainty avoidance is one of Hofstede's core cultural dimensions for comparing national cultures. It is defined as the extent to which the members of a culture feel threatened by ambiguous or unknown situations and have created beliefs and institutions that try to avoid these. In practical terms, it measures how comfortable a society is with uncertainty and unpredictability in daily life. Cultures with a high UAI, high uncertainty avoidance index, experience greater anxiety in the face of the unknown and typically endorse strict rules, formal structures, and clear guidelines to minimize ambiguity. By contrast, low UAI cultures are more comfortable with risk and change, tending to tolerate unstructured or novel situations with fewer formal rules. Hofstede framed the fundamental question as, should we try to control the future or just let it happen? High UAI cultures lean toward control and predictability, whereas low UAI cultures are more willing to let it happen and adapt on the fly. In high uncertainty avoidance societies, people plan carefully and rely on established procedures to avoid surprises. They try to minimize the occurrence of unknown and unusual circumstances by planning and by implementing rules, laws, and regulations. Such cultures often prize stability, structure, and truth in the sense of clear answers or known outcomes. When uncertainty avoidance values are carried to the gaming table, they influence how players and GMs approach gameplay, decision-making, and rule enforcement. Tabletop RPGs by nature involve unpredictable outcomes, dice rolls, improvised story events, but different groups prefer to manage that uncertainty in different ways. Culture can shape whether uncertainty in the game is seen as a thrilling opportunity or a stressful risk. While systematic cross-cultural studies specific to tabletop RPGs are still emerging, there is evidence that cultural distinctions influence participants' reactions to game rules, themes, and characters. By examining high UAI versus low UAI tendencies, we can predict some distinct approaches in the gaming experience. One of the clearest impacts of uncertainty avoidance is on attitudes towards rules and mechanics. High UAI gamers tend to favor clear, comprehensive rule systems and consistent rule enforcement, just as high UA societies may have written rules and procedures in workplaces to cover all contingencies. High UAI gaming groups often feel more comfortable when the game's rules are well defined and followed closely. The presence of a detailed rulebook and a strict GM can provide a sense of stability and fairness, minimizing the anxiety of arbitrariness. In cultures with strong uncertainty avoidance, people value control and predictability, and having a set structure in everything helps reduce stress. In a tabletop role-playing game context, this may translate to groups that adhere to rules as written and use formal systems to handle disputes or uncertainties in gameplay. For example, a high UAI group playing Dungeons and Dragons might insist on using the official rules and consult the rulebooks whenever an edge case arises, preferring the clarity of an authoritative answer over improvisation. Game mechanics that reduce randomness or surprise can be popular in these circles, like point-buy character creation, eliminating random rolls for attributes, or using safety nets like reroll tokens to mitigate unlucky outcomes. By contrast, low UAI gamers are more willing to bend or even ignore rules in favor of creative freedom and fluid play. In low uncertainty avoidance cultures, fewer rules and more flexibility are the norm. These players may see the written rules as guidelines rather than inviolable laws. If a rule gets in the way of a fun or dramatic moment, a low UAI group is comfortable with the GM making a quick ruling or a house rule on the spot. This informal approach can make the game more adaptable and spontaneous, of course at the cost of some consistency. Rules-light RPG systems, such as Fate or rules-like indie games, often appeal to low UAI preferences by providing only a loose structure and leaving much to player imagination. Blades in the Dark, for instance, has mechanics like flashbacks that allow players to retroactively declare preparations during a heist, explicitly encouraging a flexible, on-the-fly style of play instead of rigid pre-planning. Such mechanics embrace uncertainty by empowering players to adapt creatively rather than following a fixed plan, a design choice well aligned with low uncertainty avoidance values. It's important to note that any given game system can be approached in a structured or flexible way depending on the group. Dungeons & Dragons is a useful example. In some gaming communities or cultures, D&D is run in a very structured fashion. The Dungeon Master enforces rules strictly, perhaps using official adventure modules and maintaining predictable challenge balance, which creates a controlled environment that high UAI players appreciate. In other communities, D&D is played with extensive homebrew rules or improvisational GM rulings, reflecting a more uncertainty-tolerant ethos. The existence of organized play networks like D&D Adventurers League and Pathfinder Society, which impose standardized rules, character creation limits, and adventure outcomes for all players, caters to the desire for consistency and reduced ambiguity in high UAI contexts. These organized play systems provide periodic resets to create a fair experience across tables, echoing the high UAI preference for uniform rules and fairness. Meanwhile, independent gaming groups in low UAI environments might freely modify even official settings and mechanics, trusting that an enjoyable story is more important than universal consistency. As one commentator quipped, "The rules are just a tool. We'll break them if it makes the session more fun." A very low UAI sentiment. Uncertainty avoidance also strongly affects decision-making style and risk tolerance during play. High UAI players who are uncomfortable with unpredictability often approach in-game challenges with caution and careful planning. When faced with a dangerous quest or a mysterious scenario, these players prefer to eliminate all uncertainties as much as possible before proceeding. This can manifest as extensive planning of tactics, analysis of clues, or long discussions among the party to decide the safest course of action. High UAI groups may be prone to what gamers humorously call analysis paralysis, where the fear of an unknown outcome leads to very thorough, even overly elaborate, plans. For example, in a dungeon exploration, a high UAI party might check every door for traps twice, prepare backup strategies for every combat, and avoid splitting up the group. All sensible precautions to reduce uncertainty about danger. In games like Call of Cthulhu, players often meticulously investigate every clue and equip themselves with as much knowledge as possible before confronting the cosmic horror, an approach that balances the game's inherent deadly unpredictability with player-driven caution. The Call of Cthulhu system investigative structure can actually appeal to high UAI sensibilities. The game provides detailed procedures for gathering clues and a relatively clear sequence. Investigation leads to revelation, giving players a feeling of control, even as they face terrifying unknowns. Low UAI players on the other hand, tend to be more comfortable rolling with uncertainty and may even seek it out as part of the fun. Decision making in low UAI groups is often marked by spontaneity and experimentation. These players are willing to take bold risks or attempt unconventional actions even if the outcomes are highly unpredictable. The thrill of "let's see what happens" often outweighs the desire for a guaranteed safe result. In gameplay, this can mean more frequent creative stunts, split-second decisions, or comedic impulsiveness. A low UAI adventuring party might charge into the unknown forest without a detailed plan, trusting that they can improvise solutions to whatever problems arise. If a crazy idea, say negotiating with a dragon or using a bizarre spell combination, has unpredictable chances of success, a low UAI group is inclined to try it for the excitement factor, whereas a high UAI group might avoid it due to the uncertainty involved. This difference in risk appetite is analogous to real-world behaviors. Researchers note that high UAI societies generally avoid gambling or unknown gambits, whereas lower UAI societies are more open to taking chances for a potentially big payoff. In RPG terms, low UAI players treat unforeseen encounters as opportunities for memorable stories rather than threats. They might embrace random generators, wild magic surges, or chaotic game mechanics that introduce surprise twists. Elements that would likely cause stress in a high UAI environment, but are entertaining features for the uncertainty tolerant. Role-playing games are not only about rules and tactics, they are also about collaboratively creating a story. Cultural attitudes towards uncertainty can influence what kinds of narrative players are most comfortable with or enjoy the most in tabletop RPGs. In high UAI cultures, just as in other domains, there is a penchant for predictable structure and clear resolution. This can manifest in a preference for structured narratives in RPGs, story arcs that follow established patterns. For example, the heroic journey or a mystery that cleanly resolves, and scenarios where the genre conventions are respected. Players from high UAI backgrounds might gravitate toward campaigns that have a well-defined plot prepared by the GM, such as published adventure paths or modules that lay out the storyline in advance. Knowing that the adventure has a planned beginning, middle, and end can provide a comforting framework. They may also prefer narratives with less ambiguity in the outcome, clear successes or failures, moral clarity, and few loose ends. Even a game like Call of Cthulhu, which often ends in tragedy, a high UAI group might appreciate the forewarning and foreshadowing that the game's genre provides. They know it's likely to end bad, which paradoxically reduces uncertainty, and will expect the scenario to at least reveal the mystery by the end. In essence, high UAI players enjoy stories that make sense and feel properly concluded rather than surreal or open-ended tales. This aligns with observations that certain storytelling, often from higher UAI collectivist contexts, values acknowledging emotion and maintaining harmony in the ending rather than leaving threads unresolved. There is a tendency towards self-restraint in story construction, sticking to the agreed narrative framework and not deviating in a disruptive way, which again echoes the desire to avoid the anxiety of incoherent or highly unpredictable plot. In low UAI gaming groups, there is much more tolerance for, and indeed enjoyment of, emergent, unpredictable storytelling. These players are often happy to play to find out what happens, a motto explicitly stated in Apocalypse World, a seminal rules-light RPG which tells the GM not to pre-plan the plot but to let the story emerge through play. Such an approach can be thrilling for low UAI participants who don't mind if the narrative takes unexpected turns or even veers away from the original premise. They may enjoy avant-garde or experimental scenarios, non-linear storytelling, and ambiguous endings that invite interpretation. For example, a low UAI group playing a game like Fiasco, a GM-less story game explicitly about small-time capers going disastrously wrong, will relish the fact that nobody knows at the start exactly how things will fall apart. The fun is in the surprise and ironic twists. If a storyline becomes completely player-driven and diverges wildly from the GM's initial plans, say the characters befriend the villain and start a business instead of fighting a climactic battle, A low UAI table is likely to embrace that novelty as a memorable outcome, whereas a high UAI table might feel uncomfortable that the narrative went off the rails. In other words, narrative deviation is welcome in low uncertainty avoidance setting. It is seen as creative improvisation, while in high uncertainty avoidance settings, it might be viewed as unwelcome chaos that needs to be guided back to the intended plot. Game masters can adapt their storytelling style to their group's preferences. In high UAI contexts, a GM might do well to provide clear narrative signposts and perhaps limit extreme randomness in the story. They could use techniques like session outlines, foreshadowing of future events so players aren't completely blindsided, and satisfying epilogues that tie up the story's loose ends. Many tabletop RPG products, for instance, include replays, transcripts of sample game sessions presented as stories that show how a typical adventure might go. These replays effectively reduce uncertainty for new players about what might happen in a session, teaching the structure and tone of the game. In low UAI groups, the GM can feel freer to sandbox, presenting an open world and letting the players roam, or to incorporate random plot elements like drawing tarot cards to decide the next twist, knowing the players will enjoy puzzling out a story from whatever ingredients appear. Many Blades in the Dark GMs, for example, start a session with only a loose scenario and then use the outcomes of the engagement roll and player flashbacks to spontaneously build the narrative of a heist. An approach that works best if the group finds uncertainty exciting rather than stressful. Finally, uncertainty avoidance influences the social dynamics of play, how players behave and how GMs manage the table. In a high UAI culture, there is often an expectation that leaders or authorities provide answers. Hofstede notes that in high UAI educational settings, teachers are expected to know everything and learning is structured. By analogy, players from such backgrounds may look to the game master as a clear authority who will guide the game and enforce order. They may be less inclined to challenge a GM's ruling, so long as it's within the rules, because the hierarchy and structure provide comfort. The GM's role, in turn, tends to be more authoritative in high UAI environments, a strict but fair referee who has mastered the rules. These GMs often do extensive preparation to avoid being caught off guard by player actions, drafting detailed scenario notes, mapping out encounters, and sometimes scripting possible player choices, essentially working out all the details every step of the way. The goal is to ensure the game runs smoothly with minimal unexpected hitches. When conflicts or ambiguities arise, a rules debate, or an unclear player action, a high UAI GM may pause the game to consult rules or use formal procedures like a voting or a reroll to resolve it, rather than hand-waving a quick answer. They might also establish table rules or etiquette up front, for instance, how players should declare actions, or strict rotation and speaking order during combat to eliminate any uncertainty in how the game is conducted. In low UAI groups, the player-GM relationship can be more fluid and egalitarian. Players are often more comfortable taking initiative that might temporarily step outside the traditional player role. For example, narrating small details or suggesting story developments, effectively sharing a bit of the GM's creative authority. They're also more likely to debate a GM's call openly if it seems off, viewing the rules and narrative as a collaborative effort rather than a fixed decree. A low UAI game master tends to adopt a facilitator or co-storyteller style rather than a strict referee. Improvisation is a key skill. These GMs do not mind saying yes to unexpected player ideas and figuring out the consequences on the fly. If a rule is unclear, a low UAI GM might simply make a ruling in the moment. Let's just roll a skill check for it and move on. Without concern that it's not the letter of the rules, trusting that everyone at the table can handle a little ambiguity. This approach assumes that the group can tolerate some uncertainty and even inconsistency for the sake of momentum and fun. Low UAI groups typically have a looser social contract. Norms can be negotiated on the fly, and there may be less formal etiquette. For instance, out-of-character table talk and jokes might freely intermingle with in-character action in a low UAI setting. whereas a high UAI group might set clearer boundaries to maintain focus and avoid unpredictability in the atmosphere of the game. Community expectations in different countries reflect these tendencies. In some high UAI regions, tabletop RPG communities put strong emphasis on official content and rules literacy. Anecdotally, some groups treated game rulebooks and published scenarios with great reverence. The correct way to play was to follow the book closely, and deviating was less common. In other groups, lower UAI on average, there has been more of a culture of house rules and game experimentation. Entire new genres like story games and even live-action roleplay emerged from designers and players who were willing to discard or rewrite rules in search of novel experiences. These innovations required a tolerance for uncertainty, since throwing out traditional rules meant entering unknown territory in playstyle. That is congruent with low UAI attitudes. Even how conflicts are resolved in the gaming community can differ. A high UAI community might rely on a moderator or published frequently asked questions section to settle a rules debate, preferring an authoritative resolution, whereas a low UAI community might accept multiple local table rules and simply agree that each group can do things their own way. A more laissez-faire, ambiguity-tolerant stance. As the world's most popular tabletop role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons is played in many styles. Its rules-heavy structured nature offers comfort in high UAI players. There is a table or rule for most situations, allowing players to plan everything carefully and avoid the unknown. D&D's combat system, with turn orders and predictable mechanics, known spell effects, damage calculations, exemplifies the kind of structured play high UAI gamers enjoy. It's your turn to attack. You pick a spell and you have a predictable result. On the other hand, D&D's widespread homebrewing culture, more prevalent in low UAI groups, shows the opposite. Many tables freely alter rules, create new subclasses, or run improvised sandbox campaigns in the D&D framework, demonstrating that the game can also accommodate low UAI preferences for flexibility and surprise. The contrast between a tightly run Adventurers League session with strict rules and modules and a freeform home game of D&D is essentially a contrast between high and low uncertainty avoidance approaches within the same system. This horror investigation game is famously lethal and full of unknowable cosmic terrors. The appeal lies in Call of Cthulhu's structured approach to confronting the unknown. Scenarios usually follow a careful investigative process, collect clues, piece together the mystery, which provides a sense of control up until the final horrific revelation. Players mitigate uncertainty by methodically gathering information, a high UAI behavior, and the game's mythos and lore provides an established absolute truth in the background, the pantheon of elder gods, satisfying the high UAI desire for underlying order even in a chaotic universe. A high UAI group might play Call of Cthulhu as a slow, cautious detective story. For example, avoiding splitting the party, researching every ritual in the library before attempting it, and sticking to the scenario script, thereby reducing the unpredictability of outcomes. A low UAI group playing Call of Cthulhu might lean more into the chaos and dread, making reckless choices like reading forbidden tomes or fighting the unkillable monster, just to see how the chips fall, and perhaps embracing the idea that a bad outcome, character death or insanity, can still be a satisfying story. Blades in the Dark. This modern game about daring scoundrels is built on mechanical innovations to handle uncertainty in a player-friendly way. Its engagement role abstracts the planning phase of a heist, essentially skipping over detailed planning and jumping into the action with a simple fortune roll to see how things start. This design assumes players are comfortable starting in medias res, in the middle of things, an approach that low UAI groups love. However, Blades doesn't remove all structure. Instead, it provides the flashback mechanic, which is a very clever compromise. It allows players to declare they had a plan or had some preparation in the past, but only when needed. One could say Blades in the Dark teaches high uncertainty avoidance players to play in a low uncertainty avoidance style by giving them a safety valve, flashbacks, to inject planning into an otherwise uncertain situation. Low UAI players flourish under this system. They plunge into scores without plans and use flashbacks creatively when surprises hit. High UAI players might initially find the lack of upfront planning disorienting, but the structure of the mechanics can reassure them that there is an underlying order. The rules for flashback, stress, and resistance are there to catch them when the unknown strikes. Blade's entire philosophy of consequence and improvisation aligns with a low UAI mindset, making it a great example of how game design can cater to those who enjoy dynamic uncertainty. The OSR movement, which emulates the style of 1970s D&D, is an interesting case. On one hand, OSR games often involve high risk and high uncertainty. Characters can die easily, and random encounters or random treasure tables are common. This seems tailor-made for low UAI thrill seekers who accept that any decision could be fatal and are excited by the danger. On the other hand, the OSR ethos puts a lot of emphasis on player skill, planning, and creative problem solving, instead of relying on character stats alone. In a sense, OSR play allows high UAI personalities to cope with a dangerous world by strict procedural play. Careful mapping, cautious movement, using 10-foot poles to probe ahead. The rules might be lighter than modern D&D, but the procedures, the implied rules of how to survive a dungeon, are often quite rigidly followed. Thus, OSR games can paradoxically appeal to both sides. Low UAI players enjoy the unpredictability and emergent story from random dice rolls, while high UAI players enjoy the challenge of exerting control over a chaotic environment through systematic play, turning the uncertainty into a sort of puzzle to be solved with logic. It highlights that within any game, players find strategies to match their uncertainty tolerance. Hofstede's Uncertainty Avoidance Index offers a useful lens for examining why tabletop role-playing gamers might prefer different styles of play around the world. Cultures high in uncertainty avoidance socialize people to seek stability, clear rules, and careful planning, tendencies that emerge at the gaming table as strict rule adherence, methodical decision-making, and structured storytelling. In contrast, cultures low in uncertainty avoidance encourage comfort with ambiguity and change, which is reflected in more improvisational GMing, risk-friendly player behavior, and flexible narratives in tabletop role-playing games. These differences are evident in how groups approach game mechanics, crunchy rule complexity versus rules-light freedom, how they make decisions in-game, cautious planning versus bold experimentation, how they construct stories, guided plots versus emergent tales, and how the social contract between players and GMs is formed. For example, as discussed, a gaming group in a high UAI context might stick closely to a published D&D adventure and its rules for the sense of security that provides, while a low UAI group might hack the rules or wander off script without worry. Cultural values do not rigidly determine individual behavior. There is plenty of variation with any culture, but they shape general patterns and preferences that can be observed in the aggregate. Understanding these patterns can foster more empathy and adaptability in the tabletop role-playing game community. GMs running games for international groups, for instance, might consider balancing structure and spontaneity to accommodate players' comfort levels with uncertainty. Game designers, too, can take into account how mechanics will be received by different audiences. A very open-ended game might need extra guidance when introduced in high UAI markets, whereas a very rules-heavy game might be happily embraced in those same markets but seen as overly constraining in low UAI ones. In the end, one of the strengths of tabletop role-playing as a form of play is its flexibility. It is a medium that can be tailored to many styles, from the most tightly scripted dungeon crawl to the most free-form collaborative drama. This flexibility means that neither high nor low uncertainty avoidance is inherently better for enjoying RPGs. Rather, each group finds the equilibrium that makes them feel engaged and safe. Cultural UAI simply influences where that equilibrium tends to lie. By grounding our understanding of play styles in cultural theory, we might gain insight into why a group of players might obsess over rulebooks and battle maps, while another group elsewhere barely touches the rules and treats the game as improvised theater. Both are valid approaches rooted in deeper values about risk and uncertainty. Appreciating these differences not only enriches our global gaming community, but also echoes Hofstede's broader lesson. What seems natural in how we handle the unknown is often culturally conditioned. Tabletop role-playing games as a microcosm of social interaction indeed become a fascinating stage where cultural values, like uncertainty avoidance, are played out in miniature every time we gather around a table to weave a story together. So whether your group loves detailed planning or thrives in narrative chaos, a lot of that might come down to cultural comfort with uncertainty. Hofstede's Uncertainty Avoidance Index gives us a useful lens for understanding why different players and even different game systems approach risk, rules, and story so differently. And the best part about tabletop RPGs, there's room for all of it. High structure, total improv, and everything in between. If this kind of deep dive into RPG theory is your thing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your gaming group. And as always, don't forget to imagine, improvise, and immerse in your games. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.